Tanares Adventures is massive. That term massive could of course pertain to the massive dragon miniatures, of which there are more than a few of those. It could also pertain to the amount of expansions available. Perhaps it could be applied to the $7.5 million USD it raised across 2 back-to-back campaigns, all paid by over 20,000 backers on Kickstarter. One could apply the term to the scope of the game itself, with 40 multi-tier adventures and 80 plus quests on top of it all. In fact, I imagine some of you watching right now might hear all of this and apply it to the ego of any dev team thinking they could pull this all off. The question is then, did they? Did Dragori Games promise the moon and actually deliver? With a new campaign already approaching, it's time to determine if they stuck the landing or not. I'd like to start with a brief explanation on the current state of the game and in turn this review. This will help establish a foundation for everything I'm about to say and should help provide you with some context on what might be missing. You see, with this game being such a large undertaking, both Dragori Games and myself are still working on it. Dragori Games has done a wonderful job of producing so much content and actually delivering it, and has finished all of the Tanares Adventures content, but they are still working on a promised tabletop RPG. Additionally, they are following swiftly with a new campaign that is linked below that includes updates and new mechanics. With so much to cover, I am also assuming some familiarity with the overall mechanics and systems. Don't worry though, there's plenty to discuss even if I avoid some of the nitty-gritty. Let's start with that campaign. As I said before, Tanares has 40 adventure chapters and 80 plus quests. However, you won't be seeing them all in a single campaign playthrough, because you'll be making decisions, trying to solve riddles, and a variety of other challenges, attempting extra side objectives, which are still quite difficult to achieve at times, by the way, and more. These all lead to branching paths. This is coupled by a timer in-game. You see, you'll have a variety of options on where to go, who to help, what to do, and as you do those, time passes, and eventually it'll be too late to do the ones you didn't pick. This is an awesome system. It helps add real weight to every choice you make and every accomplishment you achieve in the game. This is a holdover from the previous game, Arena, but more fully fleshed out in every way. Did you accomplish that part of the mission? Did you then speak to them and choose to help them? Did you then actually go and help them in time? Then you get such and such as an outcome. This is so much better than simply marking a decision box and moving on. And you see, this pervades every aspect of the game. That person you got is now an NPC, and in fact, is someone that can accompany you on missions and provide some support. I think perhaps the only thing I'd have liked to see added here is more meaning or purpose for some of the NPCs. How you typically gain them is kind of abstracted more than I had wished in the city phase by simply discarding cards for resources. When everything else is so thematic, this didn't really hit home for me and felt almost out of place compared to the journey phase in the game. I'd like to really nail that point home though. The vast majority of this game is insanely thematic. I said this with Arena, and it's even more true for Tanares. This is the closest board game I've ever played to feeling like a true tabletop RPG. It's such a clear cut above other games in this regard that I'll be using it as a shining example of how it can be done for what I imagine is years to come. Playing Tanares involves doing all sorts of tasks unique to the situation, from solving puzzles and riddles to having a timed search for a specific person in a crowd. Seriously, the game will show you a picture of a crowd in the town and tell you have X amount of minutes to find them before you lose them. Stuff like this happens constantly throughout the campaign, and it's awesome. Come across some statues, you bet the game will show them to you and have you investigate them. Are you falling? Well, better check if your character art has wings to help with that. Yes, that's right. This game will even have you checking the character art. Nothing is off limits here, and I was continually impressed with the various ways this game allowed me to actually feel like my character. Of course, cool things like this only matter when you actually get the game tabled, and that process is both a hit and miss at times. Take the rulebook, for example. It starts off strong. It has an index, so it's an instant positive mark there, but it even dives into really setting itself up as a true technical document. On page 7, for instance, you'll see colors, fonts, text boxes, abbreviations, and more defined, which was a delight to see done. However, you'll also note the dense 87 pages of rules it contains for a game that's actually not too terribly advanced. The reason for this is because even though it sets itself up as a technical document, it's actually needlessly wordy through the whole thing. For one, it likes to list things, even when not necessary. For instance, it'll tell you on page 30 that armors add +5, +10, or +15 to the max HP stat found in your skill pad. And also, according to their level, weapons add +1, +2, or +3 to all attack rolls, even if the attack has multiple targets or strikes. Well, that's cool to know. You don't really need to list each amount of increase in the game, and it does this for everything constantly. I'm not even going to bother getting into how this could be worded to be more concise, and instead give you another fantastic example of the bloat. Flip 10 pages more to page 40, and you get a whole section introducing the chapter, starting with, there are 3 parts of this chapter, and it then goes on to detail via 3 multi-line bullet points what each section is, and then another 2 paragraphs introducing just the first of these 3. I appreciate some context to rules. It can help in understanding quite a bit, but spending 4+ paragraphs leading up to the first rule listed on a page is as asinine as me writing 4 large paragraphs going over minute ways the rules are written, which I just did. And so I'll do what the rulebook doesn't and summarize. This rulebook is a slog to go through, and while not the worst I've read by far, was certainly the least enjoyable part of the entire experience. I imagine they could trim it down to just listing the rules and examples and having a cool 20 pages saved in the process. Speaking of writing, the story is really interesting and the world they've created continues to impress me. Tanares picks up after Arena, but you can play it just fine without the knowledge of Arena's story as well. That being said, I've loved the direction they've taken it and continue to look forward to more experiences within this world. It's also important to note, however, how this is actually written. At times it can be obvious that there's some oddity with the English, though overall it's quite minor. However, the style of writing might not be to everyone's liking. It is written fairly matter-of-factly and reminds me of how many dungeon masters will run a campaign. You enter the cave, you see such and such, you fear villain 1 might be lurking behind every corner, there are spiderwebs everywhere, roll for initiative! Minus the initiative part, that pretty much is exactly how the story is written. I dig it, it keeps it pretty concise, isn't overly fluffy, and so the meaning is really clear, but I can see this being a bit dry for some, so keep that in mind. Of note, this is something they claim to be improving in the new campaign, which again is linked down below. I've read the updated tutorial writing, and I feel it certainly is a bit nicer. I think it goes a bit too far in the other direction, and some clarity is lost as it attempts to be a bit too fluffy in its wording now. Sadly, one big negative here is how this story moves forward. You'll be swapping from reading a card to reading a book, to then reading another book, to then reading another book, and swapping between the 4 is not fun. Thankfully, this is something also that they are fixing in the new campaign, as I believe pretty much everyone who's played voiced their displeasure of this fact. Okay, so that's the big picture, rulebook, and story. But everyone who's played big games like this knows setup can make or break a game. So where does Tanares land? Well, again, it lands kind of in the middle. If all you have is Tanares and Arena, the setup is actually pretty swift. You grab a few things from Arena, the rest from Tanares, and you call it a day. And setting up the city and world phases are pretty quick too, so no real complaints there. As a bonus, they don't take up too much time either, and you don't set them up constantly, so it's not as bad as, say, the map and battle phase of Aeon Trespass Odyssey, which I recently reviewed. However, if you have the expansions and want to use them, you can quickly go from 2 boxes to 5. And that is only thanks to the penumbral box holding several boxes worth of expansions within it. So take that as you wish. Personally, I love using all this stuff, and that means I suffer through a 5-ish box setup, which is rather rough. Of course, once set up, you realize just how great it all looks. The tokens are quality, cards aren't bent, all the books used while playing are spiral bound, art is gorgeous, and the minis are nicely detailed. The only oddity of note here is that some pieces of art in the game look very computer graphics, and so they kind of stand out a bit among all the rest. Selecting characters is again a highlight of this game as it was in Arena. Characters are varied and the customization between equipment and skills, abilities, NPCs that can join specific characters now, and more make party building a treat. The new classes like controllers are super fun, and I'm always a sucker for a pet class. They lend themselves well to the roster. In the future, however, I'd love to see if they can ditch the attack cards. They end up taking up a fair amount of table space, and I feel they could be printed with less spacing on a board, much like the skills are now. Perhaps not, but it pains me to see the 4 unique ones written just as well on the character card as on the attack cards, but with far less space taken up thanks to the loss of borders. Finally, there's the combat. This is the bread and butter of the game and what you'll be doing most of the time. I'm happy to say it is as pleasant now as it was in Arena. Highly strategic, and the natural cycle of the battle flow is really enjoyable. Use up your moves and refresh them. Rinse and repeat, all with the same damage if you miss and effect triggering that went so well with Arena. The updated way AI works among various villains and their pathing took up a bit more time than I'd have liked, as I felt that really was the slowest part of the combat flow, but that's almost a statement to how effective combat is otherwise. Tanares is fantastic. It's not perfect, but for my collection it stays, and in fact stands out as a gem of a game for me. The deep RPG feel I get from it is second to none, and the clear upgrades over Arena's campaign is obvious. It's a ton of game though, and will last me a good long while yet. If they offer more, do I really need it? Do I want it? Is the answer to those different from each other? Time will tell. Tanares though. Tanares stays right where it's at, on my shelf and on my table, and I don't see it ever getting removed. Guys, thank you so much for watching this review. If you did enjoy this review, if it was helpful for you, please leave a like or leave a comment letting me know that it was. That greatly helps me. It helps me know that what I did mattered and helped you. And at the end of the day, that's the goal. Again, link down in the description below is, of course, that new Kickstarter that just launched. So feel free to check that out, see if it's something for you. And guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye, guys.